It started on what should have been a simple and peaceful afternoon. The sun hung high over the rolling fields of his ranch, casting golden light across acres of land that had taken years of sweat and hard work to acquire. He had always dreamed of a place where he could breathe freely, where he didn't have to worry about fitting into someone else's rules or constantly proving himself. For him, owning land wasn't just about property, it was about independence, dignity, and reclaiming a piece of freedom that generations before him were denied. So when he finally built his ranch and bought the lake that sat in the heart of it, it felt like more than just a personal victory, it was a symbol of everything he had worked for. That afternoon, he decided to do something ordinary. He rolled out his modest ranch boat, a sturdy little vessel that had been sitting near the dock for weeks waiting for the right weather, and pushed it onto the lake. It wasn't flashy, not the type of sleek yacht or speedboat that might impress visitors, but it was his. The boat slid into the water with ease, ripples spreading across the calm surface of the lake, and he climbed in, feeling a swell of pride. Here he was, floating on a lake that he owned, on land that he had paid for with his own determination. To him, it was just a quiet moment of joy, a chance to sit back and watch the sunlight shimmer on the water, to hear the birds call from the trees that lined the shore. But peace doesn't always come easy, especially when others can't accept the sight of a black man enjoying the fruits of his labor. Before long, he noticed cars slowing down near the fence line where the homeowners association's neighborhood bordered his ranch. A few people lingered by the edge of the lake, watching him as though he had done something suspicious. At first, he ignored them. He'd gotten used to stares in places where people didn't expect someone like him to own so much land. He'd learned to brush it off, reminding himself that his hard work spoke louder than their doubts. But then, the situation shifted. Sirens. Flashing lights. Within minutes, 2 police cruisers pulled up near the lake entrance. Officers stepped out, scanning the area as though responding to some kind of emergency. He sat in his boat, confused but calm, and waved to them. The officers approached cautiously, their radios buzzing, until one called out to him. "Sir, we've had reports of trespassing. Can you step onto the shore?" He raised an eyebrow. "Trespassing? On my own lake?" The officer hesitated, clearly taken aback by his answer, but still continued. "We received a call from the homeowners association. They said someone was out here on private property." He let out a small laugh, not out of humor but out of disbelief. "Private property? This lake is mine. I bought it outright. This is my ranch. You can check the deed, check the county records, everything is in my name." The tension in the air was heavy. The officers exchanged looks, unsure of how to proceed. On one hand, they had been dispatched because of a complaint. On the other, the man before them spoke with the confidence of someone who knew his rights. They asked for identification, and he calmly provided it, even showing paperwork that proved his ownership. Still, it didn't sit right with him that he had to prove himself on land that was already his. Meanwhile, a small crowd from the Wa community had gathered, murmuring among themselves, some holding their phones up as if documenting the encounter. Their faces carried a mix of suspicion and resentment, as if the mere sight of him on the lake was an offense. He could hear bits of conversation drifting across the water, claims that he must be lying, that there's no way someone like him could own that much property. The words stung, but they didn't surprise him. Eventually, the officers stepped back, acknowledging that he had every legal right to be there. One of them even apologized, though in a way that sounded more procedural than sincere. They left, but the damage was done. His afternoon of peace had been interrupted, his dignity challenged, all because a group of neighbors couldn't accept reality. He returned to his boat, rowing across the lake with slow, deliberate strokes. At first, he thought about brushing it off, about letting it slide like so many other slights he had endured. But as he sat there on the water, staring back at the neighborhood that had called the police on him, he felt something shift inside. He was tired of being underestimated, tired of being treated like a trespasser in his own space, tired of people believing they could police his existence. The thought grew bolder with every passing moment. These people believed they could control him because they had power over their community, because they had a marina that gave them access to the same lake. They thought their wealth and organization meant they could dictate who belonged and who didn't. But what if he flipped the script? What if, instead of retreating, he expanded his reach? What if he took the very thing they used to feel superior and made it his own? That night, back at the ranch house, he sat down with a glass of bourbon and his laptop. He began researching the marina that the WA relied on, the one that gave them access to the lake. To his surprise, he discovered it wasn't actually owned by the WA, it was run as a private business. And that business, struggling with debt and declining membership, was quietly looking for a buyer. A slow smile spread across his face as the idea crystallized. They wanted to call the police on him for floating a boat on his own lake. Fine. He would buy the very marina they depended on, and then they would have no choice but to come to him if they wanted access. It wouldn't just be about revenge, it would be about sending a message. He wasn't going to be pushed around. He wasn't going to let them diminish what he had built. He was going to turn their arrogance into his opportunity. In that moment, the humiliation of the afternoon transformed into determination. The lake was already his, but soon, so would be the gateway they thought gave them control. And when that happened, the same people who had called the cops on him would have to stand in line, check in with him, and recognize the truth they had refused to see. He was not just a man with a boat on the water, he was the owner of it all. When word spread that David had actually gone through with the purchase of the marina, the entire community was thrown into a frenzy. Some residents were stunned, others were angry, and a few even admired his boldness. But for David, it wasn't about showing off or flexing his wealth. It was about reclaiming dignity and making a statement that he wasn't going to be treated like an outsider on land he rightfully owned. The morning after the sale closed, David drove down to the marina with his lawyer and a few members of his ranch staff. He was met by the same WA board members who had once called the police on him for simply floating his boat. Their expressions shifted from smug confidence to bitter disbelief as David's lawyer read aloud the final documents proving ownership. One of the board members, a man named Charles, muttered, "This is ridiculous. You can't seriously think you're going to run this place." David smiled calmly. "I don't have to think it. I already own it." He made it clear that every rule the WA had weaponized against him would be reconsidered. His marina would be open, inclusive, and welcoming to all who respected the water and the land. Unlike them, he didn't believe in creating rules to exclude people, especially those who didn't look or live the way the board wanted. It didn't take long for things to escalate. The WA had always relied on the marina as a power symbol. Whoever controlled it essentially dictated who had access to the lake. Now that leverage was gone. Some members tried to threaten David with lawsuits, but his legal team was airtight. Others spread rumors around town, calling him vindictive, or claiming he bought it out of spite. But David didn't let their noise distract him. Instead, he focused on turning the marina into something greater than it had ever been. The first thing he did was renovate. He hired local workers, many from communities that the WA had historically shunned. Painters, carpenters, and landscapers arrived daily, transforming the once exclusive marina into a vibrant, accessible hub. Old, members only, signs were removed. Instead, new banners went up. Open waters, open community. He built family picnic areas, improved the docks, and even added a small shop that sold fishing gear, snacks, and cold drinks. Soon, families who had never been welcomed before began showing up. Black, Latino, and working class families who had always been told to stay away from the WA lake now found themselves laughing on the docks, renting kayaks, and enjoying weekends by the water. For the first time, the lake wasn't just a playground for the wealthy few, it became a gathering place for everyone. Of course, The WA hated this. At one of their closed-door meetings, Charles tried rallying the board. "We need to take action. This man is lowering the prestige of our community. Next thing you know, we'll have outsiders everywhere." But others were less confident. Some saw their own neighbors enjoying the marina under David's ownership and realized fighting him wasn't just futile, it made them look petty. What stung the board the most was that David didn't once rub his victory in their faces. He didn't flaunt wealth, didn't brag about winning. Instead, he kept showing up in his jeans and boots, working alongside the staff, grilling food at community events, and chatting with families as if he were just another neighbor. His humility disarmed some of the hostility, though others clung to their resentment. The police officers who had once been called on him came by one afternoon. This time, not because of a complaint, but because David invited them to a charity fishing event he hosted for local kids. One officer quietly admitted, "We didn't know the whole story that day. We just got the call from the WA and assumed it was trespassing. Seeing what you've done here, it's clear you belong." David simply nodded, choosing not to dwell on past humiliations. For him, this was never about revenge. It was about building something bigger than himself. Months passed, and the marina flourished. Boating clubs from nearby towns began booking events there. Local musicians performed by the docks on summer nights, and even schools organized field trips for children to learn about fishing, boating, and conservation. What was once an exclusive symbol of control had become a cultural landmark for the entire region. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The very people who had tried to keep David off the water were now forced to watch as he brought life and prosperity to the lake in ways they had never managed. Some of the WA members eventually started bringing their own families to the marina. At first, it was awkward, but David welcomed them just the same as everyone else. That, more than anything, showed who truly held character. The transformation of the marina also shifted property values in unexpected ways. Instead of dropping, as the WA had feared, homes around the lake rose in value because of the buzz David's improvements created. Realtors began advertising the community as a vibrant and inclusive lakefront neighborhood. Ironically, David's ownership benefited the very people who had once tried to push him out. But David didn't care about that. He cared about legacy. When asked by a local journalist why he went through all the trouble instead of just suing the WA or moving away, David said, "Because walking away would have meant letting them define me." Owning the marina wasn't about money. It was about making sure no kid, no family, no person ever feels like they don't belong here the way I did that day. It wasn't the ending the WA had wanted, but it was the one they deserved. Their attempt to humiliate David only ended up elevating him into a figure the entire community respected. In time, the phrase, "David's Marina," became a point of pride for the town, and the story of how a black rancher turned an insult into inspiration spread far beyond the lake. For David, every sunset he watched from his boat, every child's laughter he heard on the docks, and every handshake he exchanged at the marina was a reminder. Dignity can't be taken by force, it can only be surrendered. And he had refused to surrender his. Would you like me to also expand part 3 where the WA finally confronts the consequences of their prejudice, maybe with some of the board members being forced to